Good evening, dear listeners. Sometimes the truth doesn't shout. It waits, quiet, patient, until the very last second. This is one of those stories. The courtroom in Accra was packed that morning. You could feel the tension hanging in the air like Hamatan dust. Everyone was there for a reason. The state versus Daniel Kweku Asare, a young man, quiet, reserved, accused of murdering a wealthy businessman, Mr. Bediako. The evidence? Strong, too strong. Daniel's fingerprints were found in the man's house. Witnesses claimed they saw him near the scene that night. And worst of it all, the murder weapon, a blood-stained knife, was removed from the gutter just behind his room. To the public, the case was already finished. But inside that courtroom, one woman wasn't convinced. Defense lawyer Ama Sewa. Sharp mind, calm voice. The kind of lawyer who didn't speak much, but when she did, people listened. Still, even she looked concerned. Your Honor, the prosecutor said confidently, adjusting his tie. The evidence before this court leaves no room for doubt. The accused had motive, opportunity, and direct connection to the crime scene. Mames filled the room. Amma stood slowly. Your Honor, she began. We maintain that my client is innocent. A few people scoffed quietly. Because at this point, it didn't look good. Not at all. The trial went on for days, witness after witness. A neighbor claimed she saw Daniel arguing with the victim a week before his death. The security guard testified that Daniel had visited the house the evening of the murder. Even a forensic expert confirmed that the fingerprints matched. Pieces by pieces, the rope tightened around Daniel's neck. And through it all, Daniel said very little. Just one sentence, over and over. I didn't do it. Then came the final day, Judgment Day. The courtroom was silent, heavy. You could hear people breathing. The judge adjusted his glass and began. Having reviewed the evidence and testimonies presented before this court, objection, Your Honor, the voice cut through the room like thunder. All heads turned. Amasewa stood, holding a brown envelope. Now let's pause. Let me take you back to the genesis of the story. If we are going to understand how close Daniel came to losing everything, we need to go back a bit, before the courtroom, before the accusation, back to where it all began. Daniel wasn't the kind of man people noticed. He grew up in a small compound house in Nima, raised by a single mother who sold wache by the roadside every morning. Life was never easy, but it was honest. From a young age, Daniel understood one thing clearly. If you want a better life, you don't cut through corners. While other boys chased quick money, Daniel stayed focused. He worked small jobs after school, carrying loads at the market, washing cars, even fixing broken radios he taught himself to repair. He wasn't brilliant in class, but he was determined, and determination carried him far. Years later, Daniel landed a job as a junior accountant assistant at a private logistics company owned by wealthy Mr. Bediako. It was the biggest opportunity of his life. For the first time, things began to change. He moved his mother out of the crowded compound into a small but decent apartment. He dressed better, he spoke with more confidence. At the company, Daniel quickly built a reputation, honest, quiet, reliable. One evening, while reviewing some routine financial records, Daniel noticed something strange. Numbers that didn't add up. At first, he thought it was a mistake, but the deeper he looked, the clearer it became. Money was missing. Large sums, and it wasn't random. It was carefully moved, disguised, hidden inside legitimate transactions. Someone inside the company was stealing. Daniel had a choice: ignore it, like many would, or speak up. He chose the harder path. He requested a private meeting with Mr. Bediako. That meeting changed everything. At first, the businessman didn't believe him, but Daniel came prepared. Documents, record, timelines, evidence. By the end of the meeting, Mr. Bediako's expression had changed completely. Cold, serious. "Leave this with me," he told Daniel. The person behind the theft wasn't just anyone. It was someone close to the system, someone who had been quietly siphoning money for years without raising suspicion. The senior operations manager named Richard Tando Adote. A man people respected, a man who had built trust over time, and a man who had been using others like Mensah to help cover his tracks. When Mr. Bediako started asking questions internally, Richard knew something was wrong, and it didn't take long for him to find out why. It was Daniel. From that moment, Daniel became the problem that needed to disappear, not killed. That would be too obvious. No, something cleaner, something permanent, something that would destroy his credibility forever. That is when the plan was set in motion. First, they needed to place Daniel at the scene. Mensah, the security guard, testified that Daniel visited the house the night of the murder. That part was easy because it was true. Mr. Bediako had called Daniel that evening to discuss the missing funds further. Daniel went, they spoke, and then he left, alive. But after Daniel left, Mensah turned. This time not as a guard, but as a killer. The second part of the plan was to tie Daniel directly to the murder. Mensah had access to the house. He knew Daniel had been there earlier. Using gloves, he carefully wiped surfaces, leaving only the fingerprints Daniel had unknowingly placed during the visit. A glass, a door handle, just enough. Then came the final move, the knife. After the murder, Mensah disposed of the weapon near Daniel's compound, late at night, when no one was watching. It was perfect, clean, convincing. By morning, the story had already written itself. A young man with access and a disagreement with the victim, fingerprints at the scene, murder weapon near his home, everything pointed to one person, Daniel. And the worst part, Daniel didn't even understand what was happening. Now let's get back to the courtroom. Amasewa stood, holding a brown envelope. Her hands were steady, but her eyes intense. "Your Honor, the defense has just received new evidence, critical evidence, that could change the entire direction of this case." The prosecutor frowned. "This is highly irregular." Amma didn't even look at him. "This evidence was deliberately withheld," she said, "and we only obtained it late last night." The courtroom erupted with whispers. The judge raised his hand. "Order!" Counsel approached the bench. Minutes felt like hours. Then the judge nodded. "You may proceed." Amma walked to the center of the courtroom. "This," she said, holding up the pen drive. "This is a CCTV footage from a private security camera 2 houses away from the victim's residence." The footage was played on a screen. Grainy, nighttime, a timestamp 11:43 p.m. The estimated time of death. The streets looked quiet. Then a figure appeared, not Daniel, a different man, wearing a hoodie. He moved cautiously, looking around, then entered the victim's compound. 10 minutes later, the same man ran out, but this time recognizable. The courtroom fell into stunned silence because that face belonged to someone everyone knew, the prosecutor's own key witness, the security guard. The same man who had testified, the same man who swore under oath, the same man who placed Daniel at the scene, was the one running away from it. "No," the prosecutor muttered, shaking his head. Amma didn't raise her voice. "Your Honor, the man in the footage is Mr. Mensah, the security guard who testified earlier." The room exploded. People stood. Others whispered loudly. Daniel just sat there, frozen. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order!" Silence returned, but it was different now, heavier, shifting. The prosecutor sat slowly, defeated. There was nothing left to argue. The judge cleared his throat. "In light of this new evidence, this court finds the accused, Daniel Kweku Asare, not guilty. Good night."